Breaking news this morning, we are learning new details about the deaths of Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman, his wife Betsy, and their dog. Their bodies found inside their New Mexico home during a welfare check.
The entertainment world mourning the death of Hollywood legend Gene Hackman. The Oscar winner, his wife, and one of their dogs were found inside their home in New Mexico.
A chilling silence gripped Santa Fe, New Mexico, after a discovery that would rattle even the most seasoned Hollywood insiders. Inside an isolated home once known for peace and privacy, the legendary Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, were found lifeless under circumstances so bizarre, even seasoned investigators were left scratching their heads. What was first believed to be a natural tragedy quickly unraveled into something far more disturbing. For 7 entire days, Gene Hackman remained inside the house after Betsy's death alone, disoriented, and possibly unaware that the woman who had shared his life for decades had already passed on. But here's the twist that has stunned both fans and forensic experts: there were no signs of violence, no poison, no break-in, no struggle. And yet, something sinister clung to the air inside that home. What really went on behind those tightly shut doors? Was Hackman oblivious to the death, or was he haunted by a deeper, unspeakable secret? Welcome to Hollywood Dark Horse, where today we dive deep into one of the most heartbreaking and mysterious celebrity tragedies in recent memory. Gene Hackman, Hollywood's golden icon and 2-time Oscar winner, had long retreated from the public eye, choosing seclusion over stardom. Unlike the loud lives of so many of his peers, Hackman's world was one of intentional silence. He had left the glamour and chaos of Los Angeles behind, finding solace in the quiet desert corners of Santa Fe with the love of his life, Betsy Arakawa. She, too, had once embraced the spotlight, an exceptionally gifted pianist with a promising career. But in a move that stunned her fans, Betsy gave it all up for love. She left the concert halls behind and stepped into a world where the only soundtrack was birdsong and desert wind. Together, they settled into a modest house surrounded by nature's untouched grandeur. Far from the noise of celebrity, they lived as ghosts in a world that had all but forgotten them. But perhaps that was the warning no one paid attention to, because isolation, while peaceful, can also hide horrors that go unnoticed until it's far too late. February 11th seemed like any other quiet day in Santa Fe. Betsy, cheerful and healthy-looking, was seen at a neighborhood grocery store chatting kindly with the cashier. There was nothing out of place, no signs of distress, no indication of illness. But that moment would be the last time anyone saw her alive. After returning home, Betsy vanished from public life. And what followed next was even more unsettling. Just 2 days later, on February 13th, Gene Hackman was seen taking his usual walk near their home. His steps were slow, his face blank, yet he moved with the familiarity of someone following routine. But after that brief appearance, nothing. Silence fell like a shroud over their home. No more sightings. No more walks. No more movement. The house, once a haven, became a tomb. For nearly 2 weeks, no one saw or heard from either of them. But here's the truly eerie part: no one even noticed. Not the neighbors. Not the press. Not even concerned friends. Had their quiet life become so invisible that their disappearance simply faded into the background? But the story takes an even darker turn when we examine Gene Hackman's mental condition. The beloved actor had reportedly been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's, a cruel disease that slowly erases the lines between memory and reality. According to close family sources, Hackman had started showing signs of confusion, forgetting dates, misplacing objects, even mistaking dreams for memories. Still, thanks to Betsy's unwavering care, he had remained functional. But what happens when the caregiver suddenly vanishes? Did Hackman, trapped in the fog of his mind, even realize Betsy was gone? Or was he reliving their shared routines like a looped film reel, talking to her, preparing meals, and sleeping beside her lifeless body, unable to see the horrifying truth? That 7-day gap, those quiet, unbroken days, are the darkest part of this story. What happened in that house during that week of silence? And did Hackman spend it in a tragic delusion, completely unaware that the love of his life had died just feet away? The autopsy results finally delivered a name to the monster that had taken Betsy Arakawa, Hirus, a rare and deadly virus that sounds like something out of a horror film. Known to lurk in the rodent-infested deserts of the American Southwest, Hirus spreads invisibly, carried in dust, dried droppings, and shadows. It's an assassin most people don't even know exists until it's far too late. In its early stages, it masquerades as a common cold, but within hours, it can ravage the lungs, turning them into fluid-filled prisons. The fatality rate? A staggering 30 to 50%. And yet, in this twisted tale, the virus claimed only one victim. Gene Hackman, living under the same roof, tested completely negative. This cruel irony only deepens the mystery. How did Betsy, and only Betsy, come into contact with this deadly pathogen? Could she have been exposed while cleaning? Changing bedding? Moving storage boxes in an unused room? Or is there something more to this, something the public hasn't been told? And here's where the psychological horror truly sets in. Betsy's symptoms would have been mild at first, maybe a cough, a little fatigue, nothing alarming. But within hours, her body would have begun to fail her. Breathing would become a struggle. And unless someone recognized the danger and sought medical help immediately, death would come swiftly. But what if the only person with her was lost in the haze of Alzheimer's? Gene Hackman, her husband, her protector, might have watched her collapse, confused, scared, unable to understand what was happening. Perhaps he thought she was simply resting. Perhaps he believed she was sleeping off a fever. Or maybe, he simply didn't know how to ask for help anymore. With no clear understanding of time or reality, he might have wandered through those days like a ghost, his life falling apart without him even realizing it. The home itself became a tragic crime scene of confusion and silence. For 7 long days, no sound came from within its walls. No cries for help. No desperate calls to 911. The neighbors assumed all was well. After all, the Hackmans were known for their solitude. But behind that closed door, something unimaginable was happening. When police finally entered the house on February 26, they walked into a scene frozen in time. A glass of water left untouched. A book still open on the couch. A house eerily clean and undisturbed. And on the bed, Betsy's body covered, tucked in, as if someone still believed she might wake up. This wasn't just a death. It was a descent into a haunting psychological spiral. Alzheimer's doesn't just steal memory, it erases reality. Could Hackman have been living each day believing his wife was still alive? Could he have spoken to her, kissed her forehead, brought her meals, never realizing she had already crossed into the afterlife? But the most heartbreaking possibility is also the most human. What if Hackman did realize what had happened, but only for brief, flickering moments? Imagine waking up, finding the person you love cold and unresponsive, and then forgetting, moments later, that she was ever gone. Trapped in a loop of rediscovery and denial. Each moment of clarity replaced by fog. The human mind, when faced with trauma it cannot process, often retreats. For someone with Alzheimer's, that retreat is even deeper, more disorienting. Hackman may have lived through days of heartbreak without ever fully understanding why he felt so alone. And in that fragile space between memory and madness, the actor who once portrayed some of cinema's greatest minds may have spent his final lucid days trying to protect a reality that no longer existed. What happened inside that quiet Santa Fe house during those 7 long days will forever remain shrouded in heartbreaking uncertainty, but what is clear is that Gene Hackman was not simply an aging man living in isolation. He was a fading icon, a forgotten giant, slowly losing his grip on reality while surrounded by memories too heavy to bear. When the police finally stepped into that still, silent home on February 18, what they found wasn't just the aftermath of a medical tragedy, it was the eerie stage of a psychological horror story, a real-life descent into the twilight of the human mind. No signs of struggle. No chaos. Just an unsettling stillness. Dishes were clean. Books were shelved. Furniture untouched. It was as if time itself had stopped, and for Hackman, maybe it had. The most disturbing details were subtle but profound: dust gathering on windowsills, a kitchen that hadn't been used in days, and most hauntingly, his walking cane lying near the front door. That cane wasn't just a mobility aid, it was a silent witness to the confusion, desperation, and fear that Hackman may have felt in his final hours. Did he try to leave? Did he forget why he stood there in the first place? Did he reach for help and, mid-thought, lose the thread of urgency in the fog of Alzheimer's? That cane, positioned near the threshold of his home, now feels symbolic, the line between freedom and imprisonment, clarity and confusion, life and death. But it wasn't just Hackman's slow fade that disturbed investigators. What truly sent chills through the room was the fate of the couple's 3 dogs. 2 were found alive, but silent, eerily calm, as if traumatized into stillness. The third, tragically, was discovered dead, inside a closet. That single, bizarre detail opened a Pandora's box of speculation. How did the dog get in there? Dogs don't close doors. Did Hackman, in a mental haze, trap it there by accident and simply forget? Was he unable to comprehend the whimpering sounds as cries for help? Or, and this is the theory that has stunned even behavioral experts, did the dog hide on its own? Some researchers believe that animals can sense death, and when they do, their instincts often drive them to seek shelter. Was the dog frightened by the energy in the house? Was it hiding from the invisible weight of grief that hung thick in the air? But even more disturbing was the behavior of the 2 surviving dogs. When the police entered, there was no barking, no excited greeting, no sound at all. Just silence. They stood motionless, watching, as if they had seen everything and knew that something terrible had happened. Dogs are emotional creatures. They form bonds, they mirror the energy of their humans. For them to be so passive, something had broken them. Perhaps they had spent days watching Hackman wander the house, talking to someone who wasn't there, preparing food for a wife who would never eat again. Perhaps they had been witnesses to a man's slow emotional collapse, unable to help, unable to speak, but fully aware that the world around them was crumbling. What many people haven't considered is the very real possibility that Hackman suffered a full mental breakdown during those final days. For any human being, the death of a life partner is devastating. But for someone with Alzheimer's? It's catastrophic. The disease doesn't just steal memory, it steals the ability to process pain. Experts have documented cases where dementia patients lose loved ones and continue living as if nothing has happened, because their minds simply cannot absorb the shock. Hackman may have continued setting the table for 2, folding Betsy's clothes, even holding conversations with her, convinced she was simply napping, not lifeless in the bedroom next door. But what if, in the haze of illness, there were moments, brief flashes, of terrifying clarity? What if Hackman did realize, even for a few seconds, that Betsy was gone? That no one was coming? That he was truly alone? That kind of realization, for someone with a deteriorating mind, can cause unimaginable psychological collapse. He may have retreated even further into delusion to protect himself, choosing fantasy over unbearable truth. A world where Betsy still smiled. Still played piano. Still laughed. A world where death never came knocking. And then came the final blow. When Gene Hackman was discovered lifeless on his own doorstep, came by his side, it wasn't just a death, it was an exclamation point on one of the most sorrowful finales in Hollywood history. He didn't pass away in a hospital, surrounded by family. He didn't fade gently into the night with caregivers by his side. No. He collapsed in silence, on the cold floor, unseen, unheard, and, most tragically, unremembered. A man once immortalized on screen, now just a headline on the evening news. The saddest part? His final act wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was quiet, lonely, and real. The life of a 2-time Academy Award winner ended not in grandeur, but in stillness. No final curtain call. Just the sound of a delivery man's footsteps breaking the silence. And in those last moments, as he reached for the doorknob or simply wandered aimlessly, was he trying to escape? Or was he searching for Betsy, hoping that just beyond that door, he'd find her waiting once more? At Hollywood Dark Horse, we bring you the stories no one else dares to tell. And in the tragedy of Gene Hackman's final days, we're left with more than questions, we're left with a chilling glimpse into the terrifying intersection between fame, aging, and the cruel erosion of identity. Was Hackman's ending a forgotten tragedy? Or is it the mirror none of us want to look into? But perhaps the most disturbing part of this entire tragedy is not just how Gene Hackman died, but how no one even realized he was gone until it was far too late. 7 long days passed. A full week in which a 2-time Academy Award-winning actor, once one of the most recognizable faces in cinema, disappeared into total silence, and the world didn't flinch. No friends picked up the phone. No industry colleague reached out. His neighbors, just feet away, went about their daily routines, watering plants, walking their dogs, sipping coffee, completely unaware that a man who once stood at the center of Hollywood royalty was lying dead inside his home. There were no calls, no emails, no messages. Hackman had no social media presence, and no family member appeared to be checking in. Not a single person had knocked on his door. It's as if Gene Hackman had become invisible. The same man whose films had once dominated box offices now couldn't even get a concerned glance from those living right next to him. But here's the terrifying truth: Hackman's story is not an anomaly. It's a reflection of a growing epidemic, a silent epidemic affecting millions of elderly people around the world. People who once lit up rooms, who led companies, who raised families, only to spend their final days in complete obscurity. Their phone calls no longer returned. Their homes no longer visited. Their names forgotten unless brought up in an obituary. Gene Hackman's death is not just a moment of mourning, it's a mirror to a society that seems to have lost its sense of connection. A society that glorifies youth, success, and social media presence, while quietly discarding those who no longer contribute to the public eye. And when the news of his passing finally hit the media, only then did the tributes begin to pour in. Suddenly, Hollywood remembered. Directors who hadn't spoken to him in decades released statements. Co-stars shared tearful memories. The headlines called him a legend, a gentleman, a giant of the screen. But it all came too late. Where were these voices during those lonely final years? Where were they when the house grew quiet, when Betsy passed, and Hackman was left to wander through the fog of Alzheimer's, abandoned by a world that once celebrated him? These are the hard questions, uncomfortable, but necessary. Because this isn't just the story of a movie star forgotten. This is the story of anyone who's ever felt discarded by the world once their utility was perceived to be gone. It's the story of your neighbor, your grandparent, your aging parent. How many elderly people today are living in silence, with no one to talk to, no one to check if they're even alive? How many will die alone, surrounded by nothing but memories and empty rooms? But what if Hackman's death wasn't just a symptom of societal neglect? What if it was something darker? Because as the details begin to unravel, we're starting to see that this may not have been the quiet passing of an old man, but the shadowy remnants of something far more sinister. So now we ask you, the audience, what do you believe really happened inside Gene Hackman's home that night? Was it truly just the cruel hand of time claiming a forgotten legend, or was there something far more calculated beneath the surface? Could this have been a meticulously planned act, hidden behind the quiet facade of old age? Were there secrets in Hackman's past that someone wanted buried forever? Drop your theories in the comments, we read every single one. Because this case isn't just about one man. It's about a society that turns its back on those it once adored. It's about the terrifying realization that even fame, fortune, and legacy can't save you from isolation, or something far more sinister. And remember, this story is still unfolding. Investigators are digging deeper. New evidence may be emerging as we speak. Hidden wills, missing surveillance footage, financial secrets, traces of poison, everything is on the table. So if you're drawn to the dark underbelly of Hollywood, if you crave the truth behind the glamorous curtain, if you want to be among the first to uncover what really happened to Gene Hackman, then make sure to hit that subscribe button and smash the notification bell so you won't miss a single update. We're just getting started. In the next episode, we'll dive deeper into Hackman's final days, unseen security footage, a mysterious visitor, and the one person who may hold the key to it all. Stay with us. Because the deeper we dig, the darker it gets. Until then, stay curious and stay awake.